Mountains have always been a place of awe and adventure, but they can also turn deadly in an instant. Today, we're counting down 5 of the most dangerous and shocking incidents ever recorded on the world's peaks. The 1996 Everest Disaster. The spring climbing season of 1996 saw Everest bustling with activity. Rob Hall, a seasoned mountaineer from New Zealand, had summited Everest 5 times. Known for his meticulous planning and unwavering dedication to his clients, Hall was a trusted figure in the mountaineering world. Scott Fisher, charismatic and daring, was the embodiment of adventure. Though relatively new to guiding on Everest, Fisher's confidence and experience made him a magnet for those seeking the thrill of the climb. May 10, 1996, was chosen as the summit day. The teams had reached Camp 4, situated at the South Col, just below the summit. At 26,000 feet, the air was thin, and every breath was a battle. Rob Hall's team, including clients Doug Hansen, a postal worker attempting his second climb, and Dr. Beck Weathers, a Texas pathologist, began their ascent in the early hours. Scott Fisher's group, including Yasuko Namba, a 47-year-old Japanese woman on her quest to climb the 7 summits, followed closely behind. For those who made it, the summit was a moment of elation. But the mountain does not forgive those who linger. As climbers began their descent, an unexpected storm rolled in. Visibility dropped to near zero, and the wind howled with a ferocity that erased the trail back to camp. For Doug Hansen, the climb had been a culmination of years of effort and sacrifice. Encouraged by Rob Hall, he pushed beyond the turnaround time. But on the descent, Hansen's strength failed him near the south summit. Rob Hall stayed behind, refusing to abandon his client. Their radio transmissions to base camp became increasingly desperate. But help would not come. Doug Hansen succumbed to the cold, and Rob Hall, exposed to the elements overnight, sent his final message to his pregnant wife in New Zealand. Meanwhile, Scott Fisher, weakened by illness and exhaustion, was unable to descend. He too perished in the storm. Dr. Beck Weathers, left for dead after falling unconscious, miraculously regained consciousness. Disoriented and blinded by snow blindness, he staggered back to Camp 4 in a feat of sheer willpower. His survival became one of the few rays of hope in an otherwise grim tale. When the storm cleared, the full scale of the tragedy became evident. 8 climbers lost their lives over those fateful days, including Yasuko Namba, who succumbed to exposure just meters from safety. The K2 tragedy of 2008. High in the Karakoram range of Pakistan, where the mighty K2 pierces the heavens, lies a tale both awe-inspiring and devastating. At 8,611 meters, K2 is Earth's second highest peak, known as the Savage Mountain. The story begins on the morning of August 1, 2008. The climbers had spent weeks acclimatizing, moving up and down the mountain to prepare their bodies for the thin air. Supplies were cached at higher camps, ropes were fixed, and all eyes were on the weather. It was now or never. At dawn, a procession of climbers began their final push from Camp 4 at 7,900 meters. The narrow passage, flanked by walls of ice and rock, was a bottleneck not just in name but in effect. Progress slowed as climbers waited their turn to ascend. As the hours ticked by, delays mounted. Climbers lingered in the death zone, where oxygen levels are insufficient to sustain human life for long. Yet, spurred by ambition and the hope of success, they pressed on. By late afternoon, the first climbers reached the summit. Jubilant cries echoed across the desolate peak. For a moment, they were on top of the world, both literally and figuratively. But triumph turned to tragedy as the sun dipped below the horizon. Descending the bottleneck in darkness was treacherous enough. Then, disaster struck. The serac above, massive and unstable, gave way. Ice and debris cascaded down, severing the fixed ropes and scattering climbers like leaves in a storm. Climbers were left to navigate a labyrinth of ice cliffs and crevasses with no ropes to guide them. Some were lost to the void instantly, their cries swallowed by the mountain. Others clung to hope, battling exhaustion, frostbite, and despair. One by one, stories of heroism and heartbreak unfolded. Pemba Gild Sherpa, a Nepalese climber, emerged as a beacon of bravery. Despite his own peril, he tirelessly searched for survivors, guiding the lost and injured to safety. Marco Confortola, an Italian alpinist, suffered severe frostbite but lived to recount the horrors he witnessed. Others, like Gerard MacDonald of Ireland, displayed extraordinary selflessness. MacDonald reportedly saved other climbers, only to vanish himself. By dawn on August 2nd, the mountain was eerily quiet. The once bustling summit push had devolved into a grim tally of the lost. 11 climbers, men and women who had dared to dream, were gone. Their nationalities varied, but their fate was shared. They had become part of K2's haunting legacy, the Anapa Avalanche. The morning of October 14, 2014, began like any other in the Annapurna circuit. Hundreds of trekkers from across the globe had come to traverse the trails. Anna was one of hundreds preparing for the trek of a lifetime. It began subtly, with whispers of wind and a gentle snowfall. But as the hours passed, those whispers grew into an unrelenting howl. A cyclone from the Bay of Bengal had made its way to the mountains, bringing with it a ferocious blizzard. The storm was unprecedented for October. Trekkers and guides, unprepared for such conditions, sought refuge wherever they could. But for those caught in the open, the storm was merciless. The Thorong La Pass, at 5,416 meters, became a trap. As night fell, the storm showed no signs of relenting. Rescue operations began at dawn, but the sheer scale of the disaster made their task Herculean. Over 500 trekkers and guides were stranded across the region. Communications were sparse, and the treacherous conditions hampered efforts. By the end of the rescue efforts, 43 lives had been lost. Among them were trekkers, guides, and porters from around the world. Hundreds more were injured, many suffering severe frostbite. The tragedy of the Eiger Nordwand. The Nordwand presented an opportunity for glory, and a group of young men answered its call. Among them were 2 German climbers, Tony Kurz and Andreas Hinterstoisser. Both were seasoned alpinists, daring and skilled, with a bond forged through countless climbs. Joining them were 2 Austrians, Willi Enger and Eddie Rayner. Together, they formed an uneasy partnership, for men from 2 nations, united by a shared dream. On the first day, the climbers made good progress. Yet, the mountain's mood soon darkened. A sudden storm swept in, draping the Nordwand in a shroud of ice and snow. The storm raged on for days, a relentless barrage of wind, ice, and snow. The climbers sought shelter wherever they could, clinging to ledges and cracks. They were battered and bruised, frostbitten and weary. Their supplies dwindled, and hope began to wane. Willi Enger, who had been injured by falling rock early in the climb, grew weaker with each passing hour. His condition slowed the group, forcing them to make agonizing decisions. Should they press on together, knowing it might mean all their lives? They chose to stay together, bound by loyalty and the unspoken code of the mountains. On the 4th day, their situation grew desperate. The Austrians, Eddie Rayner and Willi Enger, were in dire straits. Rayner's hands were so frozen he could barely tie a knot, and Enger's injuries left him incapacitated. Yet Tony Kurz and Andreas Hinterstoisser pressed on, trying to find a way to descend. Then came the unthinkable. Hinterstoisser, the brilliant climber whose traverse had brought them so far, lost his grip and fell to his death. Kurz was devastated. His closest friend, his partner in adventure, was gone. But there was no time to grieve. By now, only Tony Kurz remained alive. Alone, frostbitten, and exhausted. He clung to the Nordwand with a strength born of sheer will. Below him, rescuers had gathered, watching helplessly as the storm continued to rage. They called out to him, urging him to hold on, to descend, to survive. Kurz, summoning the last reserves of his strength, began to descend. Inch by inch, he lowered himself down the icy face, his frozen hands struggling to grip the rope. He was so close to the rescuers that they could see his face, hear his labored breathing. Victory seemed within reach, but the Eiger had one final cruelty in store. The rope Kurz needed to complete his descent had become tangled. No amount of effort could free it. Dangling just feet above salvation, Kurz was trapped. He cried out in anguish, his words a mix of German and despair. "I cannot go on." The rescuers watched in horror as his strength ebbed away. As night fell, Tony Kurz succumbed to the cold and exhaustion. He died within sight of those who had come to save him. The Manaslu Avalanche of 2012. Manaslu, at 8,163 meters, is often considered a gateway to the more technical peaks like Everest. The mountain is unpredictable, its glaciers shifting and creaking under the weight of time. And that year, the weather was particularly volatile. The warnings were there. Meteorologists had noted heavy snowfall in the days leading up to the climb. Avalanches were a constant threat, but for many, the desire to push forward outweighed the risks. On the night of September 22, 2012, climbers at Camp 3, perched at around 6,800 meters, prepared for their summit push. In the early hours of September 23rd, while most were still asleep, a massive serac, a block of glacial ice the size of a building, broke free. It triggered an avalanche that thundered down the mountain, gaining speed and volume, a wall of snow and ice hurtling toward the climbers below. For those at Camp 3, there was no time to react. The avalanche swept through with terrifying force, burying tents, equipment, and people under tons of snow. The tranquility of the night shattered into screams and silence. When dawn broke, the scale of the disaster became clear. Some climbers were alive, clawing their way out of the snow, disoriented and frostbitten. Others were less fortunate, their lives claimed by the mountain. In total, 11 people lost their lives that day, including climbers from Nepal, Germany, Spain, and Italy. Rescue efforts began immediately, but the high altitude and dangerous conditions made it a race against time. Helicopter pilots braved thin air and unpredictable winds to reach the survivors, pulling off daring evacuations. Yet, for many families, the calls they received confirmed their worst fears. Mountains test the limits of human courage and endurance, but they also remind us of nature's immense power. These stories serve as both warnings and tributes to the brave souls who dare to climb. Which of these incidents left you the most shaken? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more incredible stories from the wild.